Can you imagine making a $200 billion leadership mistake that costs you everything? Can you imagine going from being at the top of the mountain and on top of the world to actually being gone from the mindset, the conversation, and the industry that you helped to build? That's the question that I'm asking you today. And this is the conversation that I want to have today, because you might be making the biggest mistake of your career, and the leadership team that you're on is even making a bigger mistake. See, I'll never forget, I had the opportunity to help an organization facilitate a leadership retreat. And when we were in the room having the conversation around their organization, their past, and where they existed in the marketplace, I heard a lot of amazing things, but I also heard some things that were incredibly wrong. See, they had smart, capable people in the room, people who had achieved unprecedented success, people who literally were legendary in what they had built. But the culture that they had around the table is that they were resting on their laurels. They were resting on their past performance and thinking that it was going to equal future outcomes. Not only that, they created an environment where they had all of the answers, and that there was no need to talk to the leaders below them or even the frontline team members below them to get information, because they had all of the answers. And as I was sitting there listening to them, I had to put a pause in the meeting and stop them in their tracks and tell them that they were making a mistake. That in the context of where the world is today and where they want to be in the future, they were going to fail miserably. And I could point out the 3 reasons why they were going to fail. Now, when I share this with you, as I shared it with them, I gave them an example of what I meant about the failure. And when I gave them the example of another organization who were acting just like they acted, they had all of the answers. They didn't need to know anything else. They deflected and defended their position. They made excuses. They did all of these things about why they were, quote unquote, too big to fail. This organization failed. Now, I'm going to name a few names here, and I actually have a few things in front of me, but I'm only really going to show you one. Okay. So the first name I'm going to name is this company that made this device. What am I holding in my hand? I'm holding in my hand a BlackBerry. Now, I will tell you that back in in 2006 was when I got my first BlackBerry device. It was the best, most secure, safest cell phone that anybody could have. It was easy for me to read, easy for me to use, easy for me to navigate, easy for me to type on the keyboard, to send emails, to send messages. BlackBerry was everything to me. As a matter of fact, it became so synonymous with me in my hand that I started calling it a crackberry. And you probably heard that term before, because I couldn't put it down. It literally was with me everywhere that I went, on my hip, in my pocket, and I could use it at any moment in time. We also know that BlackBerry had a massive market share, because for people who worked in government, that this was the most secure device that you could actually have. Everybody used a BlackBerry, wanted a BlackBerry. I remember even working for Barack Obama and he had a BlackBerry that he also refused to put down. The BlackBerry, this device was everything. This is actually my last BlackBerry. I saved it as a souvenir just to remind myself of what it was like. But notice that nobody has a BlackBerry anymore. As a matter of fact, this is my iPhone. Everybody has an iPhone today, but nobody has a BlackBerry. I also want to talk to you about another company who was ahead of BlackBerry in terms of market share. Their company was called Nokia. There was a point in time around the year 2000 that Nokia had more than 50% market share of everybody that owned a cell phone in the United States. As a matter of fact, before I got my very first BlackBerry, I had a Nokia phone. I had a Nokia phone in 2004. I remember when my daughter was born, I had a Nokia phone. The Nokia phone had that distinctive ring, that branded ring that everybody knew that you had a Nokia phone. Nokia was synonymous with cell phones. They were the biggest and the best brand on the market. They had all the control. They had all of the insights, they had all of the market share, and they were making all of the money. But who would have believed that in a short 10-year span, actually not even 10 years, that it really started in 2007 with the invention of the iPhone, that Nokia lost $200 billion in market share. They went from having 1 out of 2 phones in the hands of every person that had a phone to down to less than 3% market share in less than a decade. They went from 50% market share to 3% market share in less than a decade. And then a year later, out of business, sold to Microsoft. Now, why am I bringing this up in the context of leadership? Because I'm going to give you the 3 lessons that I shared with my client when I was in the room. And then I'm going to give them to you because I want you to understand as a leader, you need to know these lessons, number 1. But number 2, you need to make sure that you're playing the right role when you're at the C-suite table. The reason why you need to play the right role is because if you feel like this is happening, these characteristics that I'm going to explain to you, if you feel like this is happening in your organization, you need to be the disruptor that stops it. Because if you don't, it will be a $200 billion leadership mistake. Now, it ain't going to be $200 billion if your company's not $200 billion, but it might be the mistake that cost you your job. It might be the mistake that cost you your future. It might be the mistake that sets your company and organization back to a place where they don't need you anymore because you're not providing relevance, truth, and a forward-facing insight that people need to know. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me go ahead and jump right in. The 3 things that I share with my client that I'm going to share with you about why Nokia went from the big dog on the porch to not even being in the conversation anymore. And here's point number 1. They created a culture where the truth moved slowly. The truth moved slow. What do I mean they created a culture where the truth moves slowly? If you build an environment where people feel that speaking up about something that they see is risky, then they won't speak up. If they don't feel like that they have the psychological safety to say what they're seeing or say what they know without repercussions, then they won't speak up. And when you don't have people who are willing to speak up, particularly people on the front lines, people who are seeing things change in real time, if they feel like they cannot tell you the truth, then you're going to make a mistake. The second thing that happened in Nokia is that if there was ever any bad news, you knew not to bring bad news. See, bad news travels slowly inside of this organization. They didn't want bad news. They only wanted platitudes and attaboys and good news and say how many phones we sold this month or this week, what new corporate client we acquired, what new ringtones we added on our phone. They just wanted to talk about the positives and not the bad news. And the third thing that they did is that they created a leadership culture where all information was filtered before it got to the top. They wanted to tell the executive leadership team what they wanted to hear and not what they needed to hear. They wanted to tell them the information, but it was sanitized. So if you're in an organization where the truth moves slowly, you're on your way to making a massive leadership mistake because the environment is changing all of the time. And Nokia did not see that the environment was changing when Apple came out with a touchscreen phone. When they came out with a touchscreen phone, Apple was changing the game. And that was new and novel. But Nokia thought, you know what? We got it on lock. We're too big to fail. Which takes me to my second point, that Nokia relied on their past successes, making them to think that that's going to give them future relevance. Now, we've seen this time and time again. This is a lesson that bears repeating because it repeats itself over and over again. We can name the companies. Today, I'm talking about Nokia, but we also know it happened to Blockbuster. We also know that it happened to BlackBerry. We can name multiple other companies, Xerox, Kodak. You name all of these companies, primarily Kodak, who literally wasn't in the camera business. They were in the film development business. And they reluctantly made a camera, but they didn't think digital was going to stick. So they kept with, the film side of it. Let me process film. I used to go to the place in the Walmart parking lot, turn your film in and come back 2 weeks later and pick up your photographs. They didn't see the trend for digital coming. And they relied on their past success, being a long-time brand in the marketplace, thinking that that was also going to deliver future relevance. I want you to know the stuff that got you here won't be the stuff that keeps you here, nor will it be the stuff that gets you to your next level. So the mistake that you can make is just relying on your past successes and think that I did enough, I've arrived, and that I don't need to do any more. You cannot be like that as an organization, and you shouldn't be like that as a leader. Don't rely on last week's headlines. As Jay-Z would tell you, it was all good just a week ago. But next week is going to be different. So that's the mistake that they made in Nokia, is that they relied on their past success to dictate their future relevance. The third mistake is that they protected their authority on how to make a cell phone rather than the reality that there was more than one way to skin a cat. That they literally thought that because our device is built like it's built for efficiency, for communications, on the phone communications, that we are the authority on how to make a phone. Not recognizing that the iPod Touch, and the iPhone were innovations in a way that allowed you to do more with the device than just talk on the phone. And so when you protect your authority, when you say, I got the title, or I got the brand, or I got the market share, if you start those I statements that I'm the king, or as Denzel said in Training Day, King Kong ain't got nothing on me, then when you think you're the biggest thing on the block, you're leading and protecting with your authority rather than understanding the reality that change will always come. And see, at Nokia, what they made a mistake at doing is that they explained away the shifts that they started to see. Oh, this is just temporary. It's a fad. Apple's a computer company. They're not a phone company. This is just going to go away. Then they also made excuses about why they couldn't make changes and transitions, why they couldn't be different as an organization. And then they made the mistake of continuing to defend their position. We are who we are. We are the ones that cannot change. We're the ones that's too big to fail. We're the ones that's in one out of every two hands on the planet Earth. Not just in the United States, but if you had a phone, it was a Nokia phone. And so that leadership culture of not sharing the truth and not creating an environment where people can speak up, relying on your past successes, not thinking about your future relevance, protecting your authority, that you're an expert at what you're doing, is a huge mistake. It's a mistake that I don't want you to allow to happen in your organization. I don't want it to be a mistake that you allow to happen, especially if you see it coming. If you're the kind of leader who literally spends time in the streets, you should bring that information to the suites. Now, when I say to the streets, I'm not talking about the proverbial corner liquor store or drug corner. I'm talking about if you're talking to frontline people, frontline employees, if you relate to your workforce in any kind of way, or your customers, you should know what the trends are, what the changes are. And if your leadership team doesn't know that, you got to be the one to bring that to the table. And you got to bring it to a table so that people can understand that change is coming and we need to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Because if you don't become adaptable, you're going to fail. So here's the three things that I want you to do to avoid this. Number one, you got to make sure that trust moves fast in your organization. And how do you make sure that trust moves fast? First things first, you got to reward people for being honest with you. You got to celebrate when somebody tells you something that you don't like. When they give you factual information that is counter to what you already know, you need to thank them and appreciate them publicly in front of people for telling you the truth. The second thing you got to do is you got to learn how to ask better questions. A question such as, what am I missing here? Is there anything that we're missing? Is there anything we are not seeing in the market? Does anybody have any insight that is counter to what we have put together? Ask the question. You got to ask the question. But nobody's going to respond to that question until you do this third piece, which is create a psychologically safe environment where people are unafraid to tell you the unvarnished truth about you, about the C-suite, about the team in your organization. Now, maybe you're getting some truth in your pulse surveys and your employee engagement surveys, but I want you to have honest conversation with people. You got to do it, but you can't do it if you don't create a psychologically safe culture where people feel empowered that they can speak up with bad news, with honest news, with news that you don't want to hear, news that's counter to the narrative that you've been selling and pushing for the last 10 years. You got to create that space. The second thing you got to do is don't fall in the trap that Nokia fell in, is thinking that your past success is going to equal future performance. Not when the environment is shifting, not when the market is shifting. So I'm telling you right now, you got to detach from your past. Detaching from your past would be you saying stuff like, if we started from ground zero today, what would we do differently? If we had to start all over again, what's the first thing that we would do? See, I work with some legacy organizations who have a long history and they have all of these sacred cows, things that they feel like that they can't depart from, things that they can't move on from, things that they can't put to the back burner while they focus on something else. And when they get that kind of mentality and mindset, they're so beholden to the past that they miss the future that's right in front of them. You don't want to be so beholden to the past that you miss the future that's right in front of you. So I'm telling you, don't base your next decision on your last 10 decisions. New information, new environment, new challenges, new customers, new voices, new stakeholders. All of these things are new, which might shift your strategy. And if you want to be adaptable, you always have to create an environment that you have to detach yourself from what you've already done. What you going to do next? Or as Janet Jackson would say, what have you done for me lately? I don't care that you was great last year or 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. I want to know what you're doing for me now. It's like the football coaches. Like when Lou Holtz was at Notre Dame and he won a national championship, he was great. He was on top. But he left Notre Dame. And when he came to South Carolina, where I played football a few years before he got there, the question is, what you going to do for us? Yeah, you won a national championship in the 1980s at Notre Dame, but the Notre Dame didn't play in the SEC. We're in the SEC, bub. So what are you going to do to make sure we win? And of course, Lou Holtz became a legendary coach at South Carolina, breaking the longest losing streak in Division I college football and taking a team to an 8-4 season, then a 9-3 season the next year. The second greatest turnaround in the history of college football as I remember it. So he did not lean on to his past at Notre Dame and think that he could just walk in the door and do the same thing here. The environment was different. The players were different. The rules were different around recruiting, around media. The resources were different. So you got to adapt to the new environment by detaching yourself from the past. And here's the last thing I'm going to give you. This is really important. And this is who you need to be as a leader, and this is who you need to be for your team. You need to be curious. You need to be curious to know what you don't know. And what does that mean? That means you need to invite dissent at your executive table. Now, when I say invite dissent, let me give it to you this way. When I worked in an organization, I worked with a lot of senior executives. And there was one senior executive, his name was Derek. I'm going to give him a shout out because he was a great guy. Before every time he did a team meeting with his senior leadership team, he made this statement, today I need you to be the contrarian in the room. I need you to be the devil's advocate. I need you to be the person who says the thing that nobody else wants to say. So like he literally empowered a person, a different person at each meeting to blow up the consensus that was building in the room, to challenge the conventional thinking, to say the hard thing that nobody wanted to say. Now, it didn't happen every time, but here was the point. He planted in the mind of a person on his senior leadership team to come into the meeting looking to poke holes in everything, to make sure that what the team actually came up with was sound and solid and actionable, and that they did not miss what was changing in the environment. So I'm telling you, you got to be at that level of curiosity to want to hear dissent from other people. You got to want it. Now, if you figure out how to do that, if you figure out how to be the leader who avoids the financial costly mistakes that Nokia made and make sure that your organization doesn't make those same mistakes, you will be a leader that is resilient, that is adaptable, and always employable. Because smart organizations who build great culture, have great teams, and have the highest performance are the organizations where the truth moves fast because people feel psychologically safe to speak up, that they don't rely on their past as a predictor of their future, and they don't mind being challenged or dissented upon by other people in the room. That's the kind of leader you need to be, where you live your truth and you move the truth fast, that you don't rely on your past achievements, but you also ain't caught up in your title so much so that you can't hear from people who disagree with you. You figure that out, you do that, you will become the leader that everybody admires. I hope this has been valuable. Please share the message. Don't be like Nokia. Don't be like BlackBerry. Don't be like Blockbuster or Kodak. But you want to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Those are the words from Anton Gunn, and I got them from Gunny Highway. If you know, then you know. Everybody have a great day.